Hello, this is Josephina, and I'm here to talk to you about my Joy workshop or my Joy book, which is Enjoy How to Create a Positive Narrative, which is the Joy workshop in a book form. So, how did this come to be? I finished my second graduate degree on creative writing in December of 2020. My first graduate degree is in organizational development. And when the pandemic started, I didn't know what to do, and I thought I want to create something that's truly useful. And I started my research on joy, and I started teaching the Joy workshop. Eventually, after teaching the Joy workshop many times, I didn't know how to promote the workshop anymore. And a friend of mine who is more business savvy than I am said, "Why don't you turn it into a book and then promote the book?" So this is what I'm doing now. The book is structured in two parts. The first part is 4 chapters, and it's about joy, understanding joy, the difference between joy and happiness. And the second part is about the positive narrative. I read about 30 books to produce this, and I can tell you who writes the happiness books. The happiness books have smiley faces on them, and they usually use yellow as their marketing color and sometimes turquoise. And they look happy. They're written by psychologists, neuroscientists, and spiritual leaders. Psychologists talk about their patients, neuroscientists talk about brains, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, etc. And spiritual leaders don't write books. They just speak and somebody transcribes what they say. While reading these books, I realized that I am not a psychologist, I am not a neuroscientist, and I am not a spiritual leader. My talent, my expertise has to do with language and narrative and literature and storytelling. So when I was doing my graduate degree in creative writing, I asked my poetry teacher, after reading a lot of really depressing poems, I said, "So where are the happy poets?" And he said, "There's none." I said, "Well, I'll find them." And that's how I began my research on happiness and narrative, happiness and storytelling, and happiness and poetry. And I read about 30 books and a lot of academic journals based on the subject of happiness. What I can tell you now with confidence is that there are 3 levels of well-being. The lowest level of well-being is pleasure, and it's physical. It's at the bottom. We share this with animals. Pleasure like eating, sleeping, etc. Then the second level is happiness, and happiness is psychological. And just as pleasure and pain go together, happiness and unhappiness go together. Once what brings you happiness is taken away from you, it will make you unhappy. And happiness happens, and it is connected to the circumstances. But joy, which is at a higher level, is spiritual, and it's something we have to develop. And joy comes from within, and it is not connected to the circumstances. So let me go over the chapters and what the chapters are about, so you will have an idea of what this book is about or what this Joy workshop is about. The first chapter is called The Burden of Happiness. What could that be? Well, the burden of happiness is expecting to be happy 100% of the time. According to Barbara Fredrickson, who was one of the beginners of positive psychology, in her book Positivity, she says that the logical, doable ratio is 3-to-1. We can be happy 75% of the time, and 25% of the time, we are making things happen. We're focusing, we're working, we're resolving. Then the second chapter is called The Role of Sadness. What is the role of sadness in joy? Well, people who want to be happy all the time don't want to be sad. And if you want to have joy, you have to have sadness. Joy is on the other side of sadness. And sadness plays a really important role in true, long-lasting happiness, which is joy. The third chapter is called Escaping to the Future. Why is escaping to the future a problem? Well, people most of the time are not happy now. They're not joyful now. They're waiting for the next thing to happen. But the problem with that, it's a trap. When the next big thing happens, guess what? We're trained to always be in the future, always be in the future. So when that thing happens, we will look for the next thing. A simple example, I buy a new car, I'm excited, my car is coming, it's gonna be great. I get my car, and in a week or two, I'm gonna enjoy it, I'm gonna be excited, I will remember how much I wanted it, for a brief, short period of time. But if I'm trained to always be in the future, very quickly I will start looking at other cars and I will start thinking, well, I should have gotten the red one or the blue one, or look at the white one. Why did I get the gray one? And I will just destroy whatever joy was going to come from whatever accomplishment I had going on. So joy, which looks a lot like inner peace, can only be found here and now. It's not in the future, and definitely most certainly not in the past. People who think about the past get depressed, and people who think about the future get anxious. The fourth chapter is about sources of happiness, and there's a couple of ideas that I share there. The two ideas that I want to share with you right now, because I want to make this brief, is one of the sources. First, there's the sources of unhappiness, because in order for us to become aware of what makes us happy, we also need to know what makes us unhappy and why. So I will introduce this idea to you, and maybe you already know it. It's called Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is a German term. It's a word that means finding pleasure in someone else's misery. What does that look like? Someone is not nice to me, and when I hear that that person is struggling, then I rejoice in their struggle. That is a source of unhappiness. A source of happiness, a source of joy, is called mudita, and that's Sanskrit, and it means that I rejoice in somebody else's success. But usually it's at a higher level, so it's not my partner or my child or my sibling, it's someone else. Anybody else. I rejoice in other people's success, well-being, happiness. And the second part is about positive narrative. The chapters are very detailed, but I will briefly explain. Chapter 6 is called Positive Vocabulary, and it's about words. Then chapter 6 is called Positive Thoughts, and it's about thinking and how our thought process works. The 7th chapter is called Detox of the Past, and finally the last chapter is called Positive Input. I will explain how these are connected. When I change my words, and I use positive words, I have to change my thoughts. How can I think negative thoughts if I don't have the negative words to build them? So once I change my words, I can change my thoughts. Once I am able to change my thought process, I will be able to change my reality. It's like magic. It is real. So I will give you an example. If I'm in a situation that I do not prefer, and I call that a learning opportunity, the first time I do it, it's like, what? How the hell is this a learning opportunity? But then if I say, you know what? Yes, let me think about this. I will figure it out because I called it something different. Instead of calling it a disaster or complicated or hard or difficult, I called it a learning opportunity. It's an opportunity for me to grow. And I change my thoughts. Then if I change my words and I change my thoughts, why do I have to detox the past? Because I've been having a negative narrative forever. So I've been telling myself probably negative stories since I was a child. So I do have to visit the past with forgiveness and change the stories I've told myself about the circumstances that I was in and the people that I was in with in those circumstances. And finally, I change my words, I change my thoughts, I change my stories about my past. The last ingredient is I have to have a positive input. Because if I have stopped playing the victim, and if I don't want to feel that I'm out of control, and if I really want to empower myself and change my life, I have to stop watching depressing movies, hearing depressing songs, and reading depressing books. That's the cherry on top. That's when the whole thing becomes real. So if you are interested in the Joy Workshop, you can contact me. I can do it as a presentation, or I can do it as a full workshop. Groups have to be of 8 and more, and I can talk about the cost once you contact me. Thank you for your attention, and have a joyful day. And that is a decision we make every morning before we set our foot on the ground. This was Joycefina. Goodbye.